Hey everybody, this is Anne and welcome back to Painting Big. Today we have a feature for you on OSL, Other Source Lighting, or glowing objects. We're going to talk about light placement and direction. All right, let's get to it. Alrighty. We have Vitanis, Maggot Crown Captain, today because he's got that little lantern down below there. See it? So this is a good model to kind of show you guys how I do direction. I've covered this previously in a PDF, and I feel like talking you guys through it might also be helpful. So we're going to talk first about what sort of models to use OSL on, light placement, and then we're going to show how I map out light direction with your little lantern down here. All right? So, first off, don't put OSL on things that are beneath or inside things. Let's look at an example from Pro Tip Stream. When I was painting Fungal Queen, people wanted to know, hey, are you going to do a glowing, like this blue stuff? Is it going to glow onto her face and stuff? Or is her face going to glow inside of there? And my answer was no. And the reason is that if you look at her in the actual pose where she is, see that heavy shadow that falls in here? How dark that is? And see that it's falling over her face too, right? You get mostly this arm is more bright and the stomach and all this. So the problem with doing anything glowing in there is that it's in shadow. And even if you try your mightiest to put a light paint in there and try to make that glow effect work, the fact that there's a natural shadow here is going to essentially destroy your efforts. It's not going to work. The only way to do it would be to actually light it with like a glowing LED, then work the light sourcing around that. But at that point, you've actually got a glowing object in there. So it kind of, makes the OSL kind of not even worth it. So when you've got an inside or underside area that's got a really heavy shadow, this includes the inside of dragons' mouths or something like this, or even like if you've got eyes in a model that you want to make glowing, but they're really deep set, they've got these huge overhanging brows, that is not the best thing to do a glow effect on. You're far better off doing something on the surface of a thing that's up against a thing, out in the open, or up above. So let's look at some models where that is true. The first thing to kind of think about when you're doing a glow effect is what is the actual light sourcing around the model? Is it dark out? Is it evening? Snake Lady here, the Nagendra matriarch, was done under the assumption that it's mostly dark, like it's dim. It's maybe evening. And so the light on her becomes the brightest thing on the model. That should be true no matter what your light source is. It's always going to be the lightest thing or alongside the lightest thing on a model. But when your model is like at dusk or in evening, it's even more so. Then this becomes your only light source or your only real light source because otherwise the ambient light is so very dark. But you can see how easy it is to convey the fact that this is glowing, right? Because everything else is darker, it makes it much easier to show the viewer where the light is hitting the model. Now, if you're working on a model that's in daylight, like our half-orc wizard Vanselet here, she's going to be a lot harder. I could make her crystal glow. It is among the brightest things on the model right now, and with a little extra work, I could even put more white up here. And that would work, but you see, she's got regular lighting on all the rest of her clothing and stuff, and what that tends to mean is that it's not going to be as dramatic as it is on the Nagendra matriarch. So even though we could do a lighting effect, it won't be like huge and heavy and glow tremendously because she's out in daylight. And so any glow effect is fighting the sunlight or the natural light of the day. This is also true if we decide to do a glowing crystal on our friend Lizette from Reaper Pro Tips. They're both in a good position to do a glowing effect, but both of them are going to have to fight against the fact that the miniature is lit naturally, right? I've painted the mini not like it's in darkness, but like it's in regular daylight, and then I'm like, oh, and I want a glowing effect. So given that, which of these is going to give me the better glowing effect? And the answer is Vanselet, the wizard. And the reason is that on the Lisette, there are already many light colors. In fact, her hair goes up to pure white. And that means that any glow from this crystal is kind of going to be minimized. Whereas here, Vanzale has darker skin, it's a medium tone, darker hair, her clothing is darker. The only other thing that really fights with the crystal as far as being as light as it is the glass bottle. So here, if we put a glow effect, it would be a lot more apparent. So on a dark model, it's going to be more apparent to have a glow effect. Whereas on Lisette here, because of that white hair, even if I have a purple glow here, it's going to show up against around the staff, no problem. Like this area where the crystal's kind of nestled inside of it and it's up against the wood, that will all be glowing. That'll all light up from the glowing crystal. But when you get out here, the hair is already white, so showing that the light is falling here becomes very, very difficult, especially because it's not right up against the crystal, it's out here. And as light travels away from its source, it gets dimmer. This is how light works. This is why on the Nagendra matriarch, you see the brightest light up here around her arms and her face, right next to the light source. And then when you get down here, it's much dimmer. You see some color, but you don't see it as much. And that's key. So now that we've got that talked about, and you know that you want things on the outside of, above, or up against something in order to show the light most effectively, let's actually map out the light on Mr. Vitanis. So here's this little lantern. I have painted the areas that are going to be lantern glow. In other words, have light glowing out of them. I painted them white. So when you are working with the light that is constrained by a lantern, you're going to be drawing a lot of lines. And by lines, I mean you're going to be drawing a directional line to show you where the light falls. And that's what's going to make it more realistic. Like, you're not just going to put a glow effect around this whole thing, because actually the light isn't shining through the top of the lantern. It's not shining through the bottom of the lantern. If we were using Lisette, and she actually had something over here, that light of the crystal would not be shining on it. It's blocked by all this wood. Also, the light of the crystal isn't going to be shining actually on her face. If you look at it, this wood blocks it. So when I talk about drawing lines, that's what I'm doing. I'm drawing lines from the light source essentially to the model to see where the cutoff is. Where does something else get in the way? So here, we can grab our white paint, and I always use thinned white for this because you can always take a color and glaze it over the top. And I'm like, all right, well, there's definitely light right there, right next to it, right? Because it's coming out through these little apertures. I can draw a direct line from either of these windows down onto the cloth, with the exception of a slight line right there where there's part of the lantern, right? So we start out with that. As far as how the light goes out from here, though, we're going to run into problems, right? Because we're going to run into the top of this lantern. So really we have to kind of draw a line out from this edge of the lantern. I can't go much higher, because I'm drawing a line from the bottom of this light upwards. I think I can go up to around there. And that's about it. Then I can go out. And we're just going to block it in with some thin white to show our light. All of these areas can be hit by the light of our lantern. So we can kind of map out that, hey, light's going to be shining here. It can hit all these areas out here. Technically, it could even go up to the edge of this cloth, but will it go beyond? This is where our lines come in. Turn. See that you can see where your light is coming from. Turn it, and when that disappears, that edge right there, that little dark edge there, that is the limit of your light. So what that edge is the top of this fold. So we know right then that our light cuts off there. We can go right up to the edge there and just kind of fade it out. No light, even though you might be tempted to make light falling here, actually no light would be falling there, and you can see it because your light source disappears behind that cloth. So you know that's where the light falls off. You can do the same thing over here. Now there is a little dip here, and that little dip into this fold, I probably would keep that dark. Like, I'd give it a little bit of a shadow there. Although, if I were being honest, I would try to draw a line and see if the light would actually reach it. And I think it's going to go partially down the fold. But you could probably get away with, you know, pushing it a little bit there. There will be a little bit of light here. Remember, though, here, what do we have? We have a bag hanging down, don't we? So the bottom of this bag is going to get hit with that light. You can see that. And then if you look and draw your lines, you can see the bottom of the carrier, the leather carrier of the bag, is also going to get hit, right? This is how things start to look lit up, right? Is when you start seeing this effect across several different things, not just the cloth. Now, the far side of this bag and the far side over here, they aren't going to be hit. Because if you turn your miniature, you can see that the bag covers up the lantern. See it? So then you know that this side of the bag isn't going to get hit at all with the light. You could probably go a little bit above that edge. Although then you're going to run into this lantern. Remember, this top of the lantern, remember there's a line that comes out there and limits where the light is going to come to. You also got to remember that light fades as it goes farther away, just like I was talking about with Liz Set and Bon Soleil. So we kind of want to fade it out if you can. It should always be brightest right up against the light source. We'll get to that in a second. So we know our light's going to go there. It's going to go down onto that. And we want to make it, we want to see how far it's going to go. It definitely can draw a line here. And this is where you maybe just start picking up the edge. Right? When I look here at the back of this red part, and I turn it, I can still see the edge of that gold part. See it? And it buries the lantern before I see any of the red crossover. And what that tells me is that none of this red is going to get picked up by the light. But the edge of this gold part is. So if I want to, I can put that edge there, put a lighter streak of white. Once again, I have to pay attention to the bag here, which is totally blocking the light. See it? So if you draw a line from your light source and you clip it off right there at the bag, you can go right about here. So I was about right in my my guesstimate of how far up that would go. I'm just going to block in that white. And then I've got that white blocked in there. And it will hit, since this fold is kind of facing the lantern in general, it will hit a little bit more. But now we have to stop and say, hey, wait a minute. How strong is this light anyway? And, you know, that's going to affect a lot. Because the light should always be more intense right up next to the lantern, and I haven't done that yet. So let's take some of our white and make our light more intense the closer it is. So again, got to remember your angles. The light should only be really close to white right next to the lantern. And it should fade quickly from there. Light falls off exponentially as it moves away from a light source. So that means it's going to fade out very quickly. If you have a very strong light, it will travel farther and stay brighter for longer as it moves outward if you have a very bright light. But with a lantern, unless it's magical, there are definitely limits to it. The other thing to think about, we always call it the paint gun effect. When people do OSL and everything just looks like it's green OSL and everything looks like it's been splashed by green paint. It's all the same color and it's all really bright. And that's not really how light works. So that's why we're not doing the paint gun. We're only keeping our brightness right up against the lantern. Then we'll work outward. And we'll fade it as we go. So for me, this means usually that I'm using a thinned white. And I'm going to try to do more layers the closer to my light source I am. So I will essentially bring up the area really close to the lantern. This includes the bottom of this bag. Now here we're running into a problem. Do you see it? Do you know why? It's because I talked about, remember I said don't put things underneath other things. So it's going to be more difficult to make the bottom of this bag read correctly as if it is lit because it's in shadow. See, it kind of casts a natural shadow, right? So we have to really take our white and make that really bright then to try to overcome that. We also want to make sure that the cloth right up against that bag also is very bright because all of this is going to be lit up a lot by the lantern. Everything except that little narrow band of shadow toward the back, that is where the edge of the lantern is. And likewise, this edge here is going to be pretty darn bright. But right after that, it's going to start to fade out. And when we get out to here, we're going to see that this is way too bright. I'm going to have to take a little bit of my blue paint and knock that down. This also means that we got to watch how much of the light's going to hit the edge of, say, this gold part, right? It may not hit very brightly at all, depending on how bright we choose to make things. And we also want to kind of watch it from side to side here. So whatever intensity it is, like at here, it should also kind of be that intensity here. And likewise, a little bit stronger on the upward side of this fold. You want to make things fade consistently. And remember, this bag is going to kind of cut some of that light off, except a little bit of it is going to come from the lantern down here. If you draw a line, you can see it does go back here before it gets clipped off right about there. So make sure you pay attention to where your light would kind of cut off and where it would stay strong. The other part of a model with a lantern that is going to get a highlight is going to be right up here on the lantern, the underside of the lantern. So if it's got a lid like it does here, the edge is going to pick up light. So is the bottom edge. So sometimes that works well too, depending on the design of the lantern. So there we go. We have a lot of our light kind of picked out. And as you can see, it does look glowy. You can see the light radiating out from it. You can see how the light starts bright next to the lantern and it goes out toward the edges. You can see that it fades as it gets further away. We've popped the highlight very heavy on the underside of the bag here in order to make it look like the light is very strong there. We get away with that purely because it's kind of shallow and it's up against the cloth. So because it doesn't have a huge heavy shadow, we can get away with that. All right, guys, so there we go. There is a lesson on OSL placement and light direction. I hope you guys had fun. I hope you're going to go out and try some of this stuff on some of your miniatures. If you have any questions, then please ask in the comments or over on the Discord. I may follow up with this one with a colored light video for you. All right, have a good day. This is Anne signing off.